Today I will paint loose watercolor tulips. I am using 140-pound paper and I have it taped down to a board. I'm also using a filbert brush, which is slightly rounded on the ends, and I have kind of a watery pink color, and I'm using that to make an oval or an egg shape for where I want my first tulip to be. While it is still wet, I'm going ahead and adding some more of my bright color. Now you can make your tulips whatever color you want, but I'm trying not to brush too much. I want to kind of just dab and let the water kind of blend and move the color around. I could even add more water at this step just to kind of let the color play around on the paper. I'm going to go ahead and do another tulip that's slightly higher than my first one. And again, I'm starting with kind of an egg shape. I'm trying to make it a little watery first right away. And then I will add more of my color in to that water and just kind of let it flow. The paint will only go wherever the paper is wet, so it will stay within that watery shape. I'm trying not to make my oval all the same shade. So I want some areas that are lighter and some areas that are darker, and to just kind of let the paint and the color kind of flow inside of these water bubble areas. I think I'm going to add another tulip as well, a little bit higher up. So I'm going to go ahead and make another egg shape up here, a little bit off to the right. And I'm going to go ahead and dab that one, and you can see the color just spread out in that water. It's kind of a fun wet and wet watercolor technique. I just dab that paint and kind of let it flow. Now I need to let those dry, so while I'm letting those dry, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some stems and some leaves. So I have my brush wet with a light green, and I'm just going to pull it down all the way to the bottom of my paper for the stem. And while that is still wet, I'm going to drop some other color in. And I want to keep this overall pretty light. I'm actually going in pretty dark right now, but it's ideal to keep it pretty light because we will be adding some other darker elements around these. So I don't want it to get too dark too fast, but I do want it to have some bright color. You could also add some yellow in at this point to the stems to make them pop and make them nice and bright. Notice, just like I did with the flowers, I'm not blending these in too much. I'm just kind of tapping that color in and then moving on to other areas, trying not to overbrush the areas of my painting. Just tapping in some other shades of green. This is like a sap green that I'm using just to add in a little bit more excitement here. This is like more of a lime green. Trying to get just variety of colors and values on my stems. Now this one I have to be careful with because my tulip could get kind of wide, the one that's right below it. So I'm going to start this stem a little bit lower in case that tulip comes in contact with this stem. So I'm just going to do there, and I'm going to leave a little bit of space so that other tulip could maybe overlap this stem as I add more petals onto the flower. And I'm doing the same technique again, just adding the stem and then dabbing in some colors. I also want to go ahead and add some leaves. Tulip leaves are very long and they're kind of wide, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of make that outline or that basic shape with my water first and kind of fill it in with a lighter green. And then just like I did for the stems, I can go ahead and dab a little bit more color in. This would also be a good time to add some yellow or just kind of keep it light and bright, because again, I will be going in around these stems and these leaves and making darker colors to make them come forward. So keeping them kind of light and bright is important in this step. You could also add a little bit of like a brighter blue to the stems. That would be kind of fun as well. So you can kind of play around, let the colors mix. You could lift your board and move it around a little bit to kind of encourage the mixing and movement of the pigment in the water areas. I'm adding another leaf over here, filling it in with water, and adding a couple dabs of color here and there. I like the variety of values, some light areas and some darker areas. Throwing in a couple extra leaves and stems just to kind of fill in this whole area or section of the bottom of my painting. Now at this point I'm going to start speeding up just a little bit my video, but you will be able to at least get the idea of the techniques. So now I'm working on adding some extra petals. And I'm basically making kind of egg shape, maybe a little bit flatter on the top, that overlap on each side of my original egg shape. So regardless of what color tulips you make, you can go ahead and add extra kind of width on either side of your original egg. And again, I'm just going to try to add blobs of color and then move on to other tulips. So you can add kind of sections around these egg shapes here to make them look more like flowers. And I'm using mostly all the same color, as you can see. You could always do a variety of colors of tulips too. But I am sticking with this nice pinkish shade. It's like a magenta color, very pretty. And adding these extra petals. Again, trying not to overbrush. Have some areas lighter, some darker. We can always touch it up again later. Notice that some of my flowers are kind of bleeding into my stems because my stems are still wet. So if you do not want that to happen, just try to avoid touching that green area with your pinks. I decided I wanted to make a couple of flowers that were behind my three main ones, so I'm just kind of indicating those, not using as much detail and just painting kind of the shapes of the flowers in right away. Next, I'm going to throw in some stems for the flowers that I added, and I'm just going to kind of indicate those here and there in the background. If I have some areas that bleed into my greens, I'm not too concerned. You can see one of my stems has pink in it, not a big deal. Again, I'm just trying to be loose and free. I'm not trying to be overly tight with this painting. If you don't want it to bleed, just leave a tiny line of white in between your shapes and then they will not bleed together. I'm just throwing a couple other green shapes in here, maybe extra leaves here and there to go with some of the flowers in the back, a couple extra stems here and there, just to kind of start filling in my background with a little bit more of the greenery. All doing kind of the same method where I just get an area wet, add some color, and then let it dry, trying not to overwork or add too much in this step. I will continue doing this kind of all around my picture here until I have kind of as much filling as I would like. Thought it might be nice to have a little bit more pink down here, just to kind of like have a distant flower, maybe another one that's kind of coming off the side. My left side seemed to be a little empty, so I wanted to just throw a little bit there. All right, now I'm going to start working on filling in some of the background. So I'm starting with this top corner here, kind of indicating a sky color. I'm being pretty careful to paint around my flowers, maybe even leaving a tiny bit of white between because my flowers aren't dry. I also might drop a tiny bit of pink into the sky to indicate maybe some farther flowers off in the distance, or just a different color besides the bright blue. It kind of softens it a little bit. And I'm sticking to the top areas of my picture. As I get farther down into my background painting, I am going to start adding more greens. And this is called negative painting. So I'm basically painting around all of the positive shapes that I already have on my picture to fill in the background. And so I'm trying to start mixing in a little bit of a darker color. I'm using green mixed with a little bit of blue, a little bit of purple to kind of make it a little bit darker. And I'm going in between all of the flower stems and leaves that I already have on my painting. Now you can do right next to all of these, or you could leave a little bit of white showing in between them. I'm doing a little bit of both actually. I kind of like a little bit of a white edge here and there, or I'm just painting right next to the leaves and stems if they're dry. But I'm kind of just filling in all the other areas of my painting. Now at this point my values are very similar. I've got kind of a medium value for all of my leaves and stems and background, and I am going to go in with another coat later to darken my values so that my stems and leaves come forward a little bit more and my background will go back a little bit more. So kind of keep that in mind as you're working, that we do want a different range of values on the bottom part of our pictures so that we can kind of figure out what's closest to us, what's farther back, and give more visual interest to our painting. I'm also thinking always on like unity as I'm painting, so especially unifying the colors. So I've got some blue up in the corner of my painting, and I don't want that to be the only blue on my picture, so I may drop in little bits of blue in my leaves too, so that ties them in and helps unify the picture. Or right now I only have the pinks on the top half of my painting and I don't have much on the bottom half, so maybe I'll throw in some pinks on the bottom half as well. Here I'm getting my brush wet and dipping it in yellows and greens, and I'm adding some splatters to the bottom part of my painting just to add visual interest. This works best with lots of water, and then I'm just putting it against my finger and flicking the paper, and it just gives some textural interest as well. I'm also doing it with a little bit of pink. Here you can see kind of the impact it has on the painting, and it's kind of cool, especially if there's areas that are still wet. It'll just kind of spread the paint out and add just for some interesting marks on the painting. I'm going to go ahead and let all of this dry before I continue to build up the darker values on my painting. So I'm going to take a break, walk away, and now those areas are dry. So here I'm just going to go back in over my petals and decide which of them are coming to the front and which ones are going to be in the back. So you could either accentuate the egg shape in the middle and make that one the closest to you, or you could accentuate the ones on the sides like this one and make the egg shape kind of go back towards the center of the flower. It just depends on which petal you can see. I also have this left one overlapping the other two, so you can do that as well. But we just want to at least define some of these petals just a little bit so that they have a little bit more visual interest. Now the farther ones don't have to be as detailed. I'm just going to kind of vaguely indicate those. I'm adding a little bit of dark on the top to make it look like maybe a petal from behind is visible. So you can kind of play around with those. Again, I'm not getting too detailed with these. I just want to add a little bit of extra value to them. And then I'm throwing some pink other places in my painting here just to kind of help unify it. Maybe indicate that there's some other flowers that you can't really see as well because some of the greenery is in the way. If I add really watery pinks up in the sky, those can kind of look like distant ones that are hard to see. And I'm throwing some pinks into the green areas too, just to kind of help tie it into my flower color. So I'm always kind of thinking, how can I unify this painting with colors and shapes and splatters, so it's texture as well. At this point, I am trying to increase the value of my darks. So I am going in with another layer of darks. Usually I mix green with some purple to make it more of a rich color. And I'm just kind of defining some of my dark areas a little bit more. If I leave some lines unpainted in those dark areas, those can look like other stems or leaves that are kind of crossing through. So for negative painting purposes, that's kind of a nice effect. If you leave some areas unpainted inside of the darks, it'll just look like another layer of leaves or stems, and it will give your painting more depth. So I'm using purple and green, and I'm filling in any areas that I think are kind of muddy or the values are all too similar. If I want certain parts to stand out, I can darken the area right next to it and it will make it pop. So these are things I'm always thinking about as I am painting with watercolor in this style. I'm going to continue to work my way around the painting until I feel like I have built up the darks enough to make the lights stand out and come forward. Again, I don't want to get overly detailed with this. I am trying to keep it rather loose, but I do want enough detail that it's a believable flower scene. All right, when I have added enough darks, I might add little hints of blue again, or hints of pink, or I could go back in with yellow, just kind of little gems, jewels to finish off my painting. I could even do some more splattering if I wanted to, just for kicks. Then I'm going to go ahead and take my tape off by pulling it away from my painting to make sure that it doesn't rip my painting that I just worked so hard on. And there you have my finished piece. Thanks so much for painting with me today. Please come and check out my channel, Ehlke Art. Give it a like and a subscribe for more fun art tutorials. Thanks for watching. Bye.